Welcome to Fake Love and Flying Monkeys, the podcast where fake love is exposed. I'm Nova Gibson and I am your host. I'm the principal counsellor at Brighter Outlook Narcissistic Abuse Counselling.com.au. This space is dedicated to helping you reclaim your worth and understand the impact of toxic relationships with suspected narcissists. You deserve clarity, healing, and freedom from the pain of fake love and flying monkeys. So please leave a review and grab a copy of my book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. Let's uncover the truth and take back your power. Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Today I have another very, very special guest with me. Now, normally I give a bit of a background on who I am about to introduce to you, but I thought I would leave this up to my very special guest to do today. Now, before we get going, guys, I want to put a trigger warning out there for those of you who may be triggered by Bruce's story and what happened to his family. So just remember, if you're feeling overwhelmed, just hit that stop button and you can come back if you choose at a later time. Welcome, Bruce Bieber. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Bruce.
Oh, my great pleasure and privilege, Nova. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about my daughter anytime, anywhere, even when there's 14 hours between us.
Yeah. So, Bruce, you're on the East Coast of the US, and I am so grateful to you for joining me because you're going to share with us and my followers today your story and what happened to your beautiful daughter at the hands of her abuser. And I'm just going to hand it over to you, Bruce, now to talk to us about what happened.
Well, thank you, Nova. As you said, I'm Bruce Bieber. I'm in Florida outside of Tampa now, having relocated soon after retiring from a career in commercial real estate and construction in the Washington, D.C. area, where I met my wife, Sarah, and where we lived and raised all of our three children for over 40 some odd years. Abby, the youngest and only girl, however, was the first to venture away from the D.C. area and relocate to the Tampa area. Her middle brother, after a combat tour, compliments of the U.S. Army in Afghanistan, and being newly married and starting a family, followed her. And lastly, their oldest brother, Daniel, middle brother is Benjamin. Daniel, the oldest, who had 5 years of policing with a county police department in Maryland under his belt by the time he got up and followed his brother and sister to the Tampa area. Over the succeeding years, our first few grandchildren were born, and we're a close family, always were, wherever we were. And the draw for my wife and I to be near the kids was irresistible, and we knew after we retired from our careers, she, a public school teacher in special ed for many years, that we'd follow them. We'd come down to this area, find a house, and be near them, watch our grandkids grow and our kids' careers develop. And the plan was working fairly well. We had landed in the Tampa region, found a house, and 7 months after finding that house, 7 months after landing in the Tampa area, having sold our house in Maryland, we got the dreaded knock on the door that our daughter was killed by a boyfriend, air quotes, with whom she was breaking up whilst on a vacation with other deputy friends in St. Augustine, Florida, on January 29th, 2022. So our dream of retiring, in this, somewhat idyllic area, beaches and palm trees and all that, was obviously shattered beyond all recognition and repair that one single fateful night at 2:52 when they came to the door, 3 deputies. And it's, with an older boy, 2 older boys who had been together and individually policemen, police officers, and soldiers in combat, you as parents always live with the fear that the worst might happen. I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, we're all at risk to some extent, but when your children undergo or take on occupations that are known to be particularly risky and deadly, it's always there. The fact that it could happen, and it's something you talk about, and I talked about it with Abby, and the knock came, and they didn't have to say anything. I knew what it was, and I knew who it was, which is odd. My life ended in very many ways then and there, but it was recast. It didn't end, it's recast, it's reshaped, it's reformed. And in the wake of Abby's senseless death, and we can talk obviously much more about that, you basically have a choice, I think. We all grieve differently, we all respond differently. We're individual human beings with our own makeup and ways about us in all manner. And it seemed to me you can withdraw and shrink within yourself and maybe even start engaging. You hear about people who just unwind and spool downward and just things get worse and worse, whether it's one terrible affliction, addiction, poor behavior, bad outcomes follow. Or you fight it, you do something about it, you try to it's hard for me to say make something positive out of it, but it certainly is a positive thing if you can spare somebody this awful horror. And it is that simple. Yeah. I mean, I don't know who I'm trying to save, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter how many. If I can even help save one life somehow, I will feel like everything that I've done is worthwhile. And I'm not going to, just start drinking or drugging or doing some stupid thing. Yeah. I'm going to figure out what happened, where it broke, what's broken, what's wrong, what failed, who failed, why did it happen, how did it happen, and what can be done about it. And I've been on a journey of learning the answers to those very questions ever since. You have those first few days when you don't know what ends up, what your name is, where you're going. I mean, the time it's accelerating, it's regressing, it's standing still all at once. I don't recommend that to anybody. But over time, information and sense and balance and gravity all start taking shape again. And it's just in my nature to start asking the who, what, when, where, how, and why questions. And sadly, in this case, Abby worked for a sheriff's office, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, which is it's a very big one, very well funded, very sophisticated, equipped with the best technology and equipment, large in numbers, huge in budget, $700 million budget or thereabouts. They avail themselves of some of the best in many ways, and they're the first to tell you about it. They're not shy about promoting the good things they do. They're god-awful about owning the bad things they do. Mm-hmm. And there are bad things. And it seems to me that to be fair and transparent and honest, you got to own the bad with the good. It isn't all peaches and cream. Law enforcement is a tough, tough job. I have the greatest deal of respect for it and those who engage in it. Yeah. I'm fond of using the Teddy Roosevelt quote about being in the arena and essentially, choosing to wade into this thicket of blood, sweat, and tears when many run the other way. Yeah. And it takes a special kind of person. And Abby was that kind of person. Abby reveled in doing that. I can speak more about her in a minute, but I was going down the path of how, in my journey to learn who, what, when, where, how, and why things went wrong and what can be done about it, I've learned that a police agency, a law enforcement agency, can be forthcoming, can be honest, can tell you the truth, can own the bad, or they can cover up, they can gaslight, they can obfuscate, they can deny, they can absolutely shut down, lie, cheat, steal. And
Absolutely.
And you know
I
which
think
path they took.
So what was that?
And you know which path this agency took. They did not take the honest, transparent, forthcoming, own your mistakes, let's do better approach. They went down the dark path.
Yeah, to protect their own skin, to I guess protect against future lawsuits, just to stop them from looking bad and having some major investigation, I would imagine, and being investigated by their own rather than from outside sources. I don't know. I've heard it all, Bruce. So please tell us, because I'm hearing that they went down that path. So please tell us your experience.
Well, Abby's vacation that she was on when she was killed was in a city, St. Augustine, which is about 3 hours or so away from here.
Mm-hmm.
Her brothers, and one in particular, had also been a firefighter and an EMT for many years. So he had, taken, and as a cop as well, they've been around dead bodies. You put the trigger warning out. This is why. They've been around, dead bodies in morgues and on scenes of horrible violence and mayhem and just destruction. And my one son in particular could picture in his mind's eye his beloved sister lying in a morgue in St. Augustine, knowing she was likely lying next to the guy that killed her. And that image had to be addressed. And there was going to be a cross-state procession. The sheriff's office led and organized a motorcade, essentially, and my sons participated in it, even though they worked for a different law enforcement agency than Abby worked for.
Yeah.
They still went with them. And my wife and I, were picked up graciously. The sheriff's office sent somebody to our house to take them to where the motorcade was going to leave to go to St. Augustine to get Abby and bring her back. And my wife and I went to that site where they were massing and meeting up and then heading out to go get her. After they left, we knew it would be 6 hours or so before Abby would be brought back. 3 hours there, 3 hours back. Right after they left, a deputy unknown to me was introduced to my wife and I, a young man named Kalen Hall, canine officer. And it was just one of many people you meet in the aftermath that you barely remember, and you're not really paying any great attention. You're in a fog. But I happened to ask him if he knew Abby, and he said, yeah, he'd met her in training early in her recruiting career. There was a special school that they do for 2 weeks, and he taught part of it. And I knew the guy that killed Abby also taught. It was an instructor in that 2-week school. So I said, well,
Bruce, he was a police officer as well.
The guy who killed Abby, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And he'd had quite a few years more on the job than she had, about twice as much. So this guy, I realized if he taught at this recruitment thing, at this academy thing, well, so too he must know the other guy who killed her. And when I said, well, then his name's Dan Leyden, the guy who killed Abby. So I said, well, if you knew if you knew Abby because you taught at this thing, you must have known Dan Leyden. He said, oh yeah, I know him. And there's something about his demeanor that signaled to me that he had a lot to say about it.
Yeah.
And I kind of gestured to my wife and the sergeant who'd driven us. And I said, just give me a second. I just want to talk to this guy. And I kind of physically separated from them. And then he told me that he had run a call where Dan Leyden had been the subject of a DV, a domestic violence incident. So I after some initial confusion, I said, wait. Are you saying the guy that just killed my daughter had been an abuser that had come to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office notice on a call?
Yeah, sorry, Bruce, isn't that
No, please. That's
just an automatic dismissal from the police force if you have I don't know. That's what I've heard.
No.
You can't have a domestic violence, a restraining order against you, and well, certainly not in other states. From my experience.
Well, I don't. The short answer to that is absolutely that is not correct. That is not true.
That's not correct. Wow.
No, it is not correct.
Right.
It should be correct. I mean, as domestic abuse, technically is a crime, right? And cops who perpetrate crimes, you would think shouldn't be employed as cops, people who enforce the law and address criminal behavior by other citizens. So that's frankly what's at the bottom of all of my my effort is why would we permit criminal actions by law enforcement officers in the ranks of law enforcement officers? Why can they lock up the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker for the identical act, but not the cop? Absolutely. And why does the cop? I mean, this is self-evident to you. Obviously, it's sensible and rational to me. Mm-hmm. But that's why we're in the soup that we're in. And it is a sticky wicket, let me tell you. Mm-hmm. And the answers to why that's not the case, even though it's so self-evident and seemingly sensible, people fill many books, and I have them all around me, many books with why that is. But long story not so short, it didn't dawn on me, it crashed on me. It was a lightning bolt. It was a shattering realization in a millisecond that the guy that just killed my daughter was known to the very agency he worked for to be a bad egg. And
you weren't told about this.
Well, how? No. Who would tell me? How would I know? When would I have known? She's dating a guy who I'm sitting in my house. He's been to this house many times. No, how would I know?
I'm talking about after your daughter was killed.
This was 2 days.
To tell you that this person had history.
Well, that's a very good question. I'll get there in a second.
Okay.
This procession happened. I think it was February 2nd. She was killed on the 29th, really the morning of the 30th. So it was really 2 days later. So I will tell you how this goes when you're the parents of a deputy. Or maybe, there's a difference between a sheriff's office and a police department. There's police officers and there's deputy sheriffs. They do the same job in some places, and this is one of those. The sheriff's office deputies do primary patrol. They're cops. They're police officers for all intents and purposes, but by name, they're deputies. The sheriff's office wraps its ever-loving arms around you in the immediate aftermath of the murder. They said, and they literally said, you lost one daughter, but you gained 4,000 or 5,000 new brothers and sisters. I got words for that. No, you don't. I'll take my one back. Thank you very much.
It sounds very good, though, doesn't it?
It does. And frankly, when you're upside down and you're grieving and you don't know what end is up, it's comforting. I will not deny it. It was nice to know that there were people, food arrives, just appears. People are telling us stories about Abby, people we never met. We'd only been here a few months. We hadn't met her friends. Yeah. And, or most of her friends. And so the fact is that in a flash, this deputy tells me this didn't have to happen. The guy that killed my daughter, that was dating my daughter, was known to this agency to have some domestic violence proclivities. I didn't know who his victim was. I didn't know what the extent of the abuse was, when, where, how. Didn't know anything about it other than he ran a call. This other deputy who was talking to me was in front of me. His visage, his demeanor was palpably, he was disturbed. And this was 5.5 years later after the episode. He said, I thought he should have been fired. I didn't like the way the agency handled it. He never spoke to him again. I didn't mention this to my wife, and I was shaking. I was trying to stare at his name tag so I'd remember it, and I texted myself when I got back in the car. I texted his name and the barest outline of what he had just told me.
Yeah.
And knowing this was going to come back somehow. And I didn't want to burden my wife. We have a funeral to plan. We've got friends and relatives coming. And we have a house. We're still living in boxes. Our daughter has been murdered. We're insane.
Yeah.
It was not time to lay on a whole other level of trauma. Oh, by the way, Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office knew this guy was a dirty, rotten bastard.
Yeah.
So I parked that in my head, and then like a day or two later, I'm driving with my middle son to do an errand. I think pick up chairs for the funeral or something. People are going to come back to the house. And he gives me a look, like a very serious look. Hey, Dad, I got to tell you something. Oh, like, oh, what now? And he says, there's a video going around that's apparently very disturbing. Some deputies told him about it. It's on Instagram, and it's a woman who had been abused by Dan Leyden, the murderer, years earlier. And in the wake of Abby's death and his suicide, she has now come forward on Instagram with a very compelling, very emotional video that I recommend anybody listening find. And her name is China Ratner. She's now married. I think it's China Perkins. But Chynna, China, was horribly abused by this guy. Same guy. All manner of abuse, physical, sexual, all the coercion and control nightmares, all the that domination, that don't go here, don't wear that, don't see this person.
The coercive control. Yeah.
All of it. Every one of it. Yeah.
Was China the person that they had the information around, or was she another victim? Or she was the victim?
No, you're right. You're right. And that's what I was going to say is when my son told me this, I said, oh my God, I bet she's the one that the other guy, Kalen Hall, was talking about. Yeah. And we married them up and indeed confirmed that was the case.
Yeah.
And then back to your question about, well, why didn't the sheriff's office tell us that afterwards? Well, okay, so now it's 2 days later. Now we know this, right? We now know that, oh crap, the guy that killed Abby had a call, an official call for service. There's a record of it. Cops went out, they responded. There were actions taken supposedly. And so we said to and I had my sons, we decided we were going to let my wife know. So we all shared the information very soon. I told you initially that I didn't want to burden the boys either. I was just going to hang on to it and get through the funeral. But
it's not a burdening, well, in my mind so much, Bruce, it's the reactions they might have, which I guess would burden them, but I don't know, I'd be angry. I would be so
we were all angry. We were,
if someone did that, and yeah, that would be an obvious reaction from you and her brothers, who would want to protect their sister.
Absolutely, and that's what starts the erosion of trust and faith and confidence in the sheriff's office. So that they couldn't wrap their arms tightly enough around us to overcome the fact that they didn't tell us, oh, by the way, sooner or later, Mr. and Mrs. Bieber boys, you're going to hear that the guy that killed your daughter was involved in an earlier episode. They could have come to us and said that, and I think they should have, and they didn't.
And he's probably out there, well, I don't know, I'm just asking the question, I guess, out there investigating other domestic violence episodes where he's the person who's, judging who's the victim and who's the villain. Was he doing that?
Well, certainly not after he killed himself. So he certainly wasn't doing it beforehand. Earlier. Yeah, absolutely. No, this is the exact problem with Gabby Petito's case.
Yes.
One of the cops in Moab, Utah, purportedly was himself an abuser. So when they stopped the van on the side of the road. So you're right. That's the exact point.
That was my point. Like, he's got a restraining order against him for domestic violence, and he's out there investigating other villains.
Well, he didn't have there was no restraining order. No, no, no. In this early
violence.
There was, but here's where the game is played. And
okay. He didn't get the order because he's got the mates, the buddies.
There you go. You said before, you assumed reasonably, sensibly that because he was involved in a domestic violence episode as the perpetrator, that he couldn't any longer be a cop. But what if his buddies changed the nature of the call from domestic violence to something else? What if he manipulates? You are an expert, as I understand it, in coercion and control. You know that how manipulative these guys can be, and I would commend to you that it's a public document. It's an official public record. The call, the incident report of the China Ratner Dan Leyden domestic violence call for service. You can get that report. It's out there, and if you read, each one writes a statement, right? All the other deputies come out and surround them and separate them and ask them questions. What happened? Tell me what happened. Okay, write up your story and sign it. So there's his story and there's her story, China's. I guarantee you, without the special knowledge, expertise, and training that you have, Nova, anybody, probably, I bet a seventh grader who's got some imagination and reading ability and critical thinking skills can take the names out. You could probably, even if you could type them up so you couldn't tell by the handwriting who was who, and it was just merely cold, dispassionate, objective narrative printing. You could tell well, obviously you could tell, but one of them you can tell is engineering an outcome and utilizing enhanced skills, training, and abilities that law enforcement have to get to a certain desired result, versus her very kind of flowery, emotional, discordant.
She's the crazy, bipolar, borderline.
She's right,
and he's been taken advantage of, and he's the victim. She's being malicious and vexatious.
And she's crazy, and she's drunk, and this and that. And by the way, she's in trauma. The guy was just banging on her car, threatening her, trying to break the windows and stalking her. And a nuanced approach in law enforcement understands, wait a minute, this is a victim in trauma. This isn't the time to draw hasty conclusions about things. This is the time to be compassionate, empathetic, understand it's a pattern of behavior here. It's not just a singular episode.
And I think too, the fear around pursuing a report like that against the police and the power that they have would be off-putting even without a threat around, you keep this going, then, basically something bad might happen to you. The police, as you said, they put their lives on the line every single day. And for that, we're so, so grateful. But like in every profession, there's people who are going to be power hungry, and they are going to use their badge, their power to control others and to dominate. So a police officer is no different. So I'm sure she would have been scared to pursue it any further.
I'm going to push back only a little bit and say, you said they're no different. I'm going to say they're very different. They're very different because they're taught to take control. They're taught to use force. They're taught to find information they have available. Yeah. So they're actually super skilled at coercion and control. That's their job. They have to take control. They have to coerce people into behaving or otherwise, complying.
Absolutely, Bruce. I guess I meant more that they're no different in terms of there's going to be people in the police force, just like there's going to be counsellors and lawyers out there who have malicious intent. And
Absolutely.
if you have that lack of empathy and that massive sense of entitlement that goes along with narcissism, and you've got all those skills, then you're a lethal weapon, aren't you?
Exactly right. And modern law enforcement agencies have to be cognizant of that when in the hiring phase and continuing throughout the career. Because you're right, many people have drawn the conclusion that folks who are drawn to power, abusing power in particular, are drawn sometimes to the field. Not all, and clearly not all. But when you combine that lust for power, that desire, and the lack of empathy, like you said, and those higher order skills of wielding power, you have a really lethal combination. And that agency has a duty to be aware of that and to do something about it. And in this case, this guy served himself up on a platter. Now, the problem is, again, going to your why the differential outcome? Why, if it's sensible and rational, is he still a cop? There's a lot in between. And one of the other things is when you're a high performing, go get 'em, tough guy who's they call them headbangers, goons, toothbreakers. They have all these phrases for tough guy cops who you can count on to be the first through the door, to be aggressive with the bad guys, And there's a time and a place for all that. Certainly there are bad people who they deal with, and you do need to use force. And it's good to have people who can and will use force when necessary, as appropriate, within the law. Mm-hmm. But some of these guys, they go too far. And I know that the sheriff's office will ask these guys to do things or allow them to do things that are a little beyond the pale. They're coloring outside the lines, and it probably starts kind of small, and then it grows. And when a guy like that gets himself jacked up in a case like this, they intervene and help him. They cover it up. They recharacterize it. They make it go away. They soften the rough edges. They can easily take this poor woman, China Ratner, and make her look like a lunatic, and absolutely blame her, discredit her, and just demean her in every way, shape, and form. And that's exactly what happened in that case. And China, by the way, the full consequence after that episode was that his corporal said, "Don't date her anymore. Don't date her."
That was the punishment, the consequence
that was the consequence.
A horrific domestic violence situation. It was, don't date her anymore.
Yeah. Now, horrific is a subjective term, and I'm sure if you dive into the case, some people look at it and go, "What are you talking about? Nobody really got hurt here." Now, I know lots of people who've spent 40, 50 years in the domestic violence advocacy world who will tell you that psychological abuse is sometimes worse. They'd rather be punched than be under. You could probably respond to that.
Absolutely, Bruce. I have so many clients, hundreds, who have said to me, "You know what, Nova, I wish I had broken bones and a busted lip and black eyes, because then maybe people would believe me. Maybe there would be support." And the tragic thing in that, Bruce, is that so many women and men, I guess, but more women, lose their lives. They are murdered when they leave their abuse, and there is no history of physical violence, because the ultimate wound to that abuser's ego is when they leave. It's the most dangerous time, and that's when so many of them lose their lives. And yes, they say to me, "Maybe I would have got more help if I had arrived in hospital every second week."
There's a terrific, very compelling and sad documentary film called Private Violence. Gloria Steinem, I think, helped produce it. A terrific advocate named Kit Gruelle, who's in North Carolina, is featured in it. And it's the case of a young woman named Deanna, I forgot her last name, who's married to a horribly abusive man who takes her on a cross-country trip in a truck to deliver. He's a trucker, and brings their young daughter. and a cousin, I think. And they trade the driving, the cousin and the husband, and he beats her mercilessly all across the U.S., back and forth. I don't know what's an eggplant. What's a purple eggplant? Is purple,
eggplant,
right?
Yep.
She looks like an eggplant, like 100% of her body. And they get pulled over somewhere in the West, and a state trooper sees her and goes, "Oh my God, were you guys in an accident or something?" And they get her hospitalized. And, there's some intervention medically. And the problem, like to your point about when the client, the victim, wishes that there'd been physical injury to demonstrate to the world that they were suffering rather than the sort of invisible coercion and control. In Deanna's case, it was visible. But even then, when it was visible, there was this big debate about, well, how are we going to charge this guy? We don't know when he beat her. He's driving across country? Was it in Kansas or Oklahoma or Tennessee? What state?
She looks like an eggplant, and they're worried about what state to charge him in.
Yes.
That's their biggest problem of the day, and she's got to work out whether she's going to live or die.
No, that's exactly right. But the legal reality, and this is what's so traumatic about the film and why I urge people to see it, Private Violence, is that you see the pictures of this poor woman's injuries. She's barely recognizable as a person. And because he didn't do permanent damage to organs, because he didn't break bones, because the injuries, the mechanism of injury didn't cause a certain quality and quantity of more quality of damage substantively, didn't require operations and surgery. It was super soft tissue injuries. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, doesn't mean she wasn't in miserable pain, doesn't mean she isn't psychically scarred for life.
So with the death by, I just read an article about this a couple of nights ago, Bruce, with the death by 1,000 paper cuts analogy, so to speak, they're looking at, that paper cut wasn't that bad. They're looking at one little thing rather than the accumulative nature of that horrific abuse. And of course, the fact that it was just luck that one didn't kill her. There wasn't one good blow that did that. The intent was certainly there, the intention.
Oh, and he probably would have. But the issue is, and also a major flaw. It's I'm all about OIDV, officer-involved domestic violence, stopping cops from perpetrating violence and getting away with it. However, in this, it's not just the cops. In this case with Deanna, even when the pictures surfaced, even when the legal and the medical authorities alerted the legal authorities finally started to act. The state's attorney in one of the states wanted to charge him, but again, because those injuries were all soft tissue wounds, the worst punishment he'd get was something pathetic, like essentially don't date her. It was like $500 fine and 60 days in jail. And like what? If you showed those pictures to any bunch of high school kids or college kids, you'd say, what do you think the sentence was for the guy that inflicted these injuries? You'd say 30 years, life in prison, 50 years.
So
it was not the case.
That is just unbelievable, Bruce. Is that about what we would call an unethical, dodgy lawyer and the judge on the day, or is that just No, this is the statutes. This is the structure, the structural law, not the individual actors in it. The legislative acts protect pets probably more than women in some cases. Yeah, literally, it's insane. We treat women worse than pets. I mean, not that pets are all abused, but we all know there are people that abuse probably the same people. But again, I'm going down rabbit holes. But do see Private Violence if and when you can, and you'll be outraged. Thank you for telling me about that. I'm going to have a look at it. Absolutely.
So back to Abby, if I could. So
yes,
when Dan Leyden and China Ratner had their episode, and the guy said, "Don't date her," it was some days later. They got enough. He didn't stop dating her, and he was somehow in her apartment. She wanted to walk the dogs, and this is all in her video, which you can find on Instagram and elsewhere.
Mhm.
He takes his gun and he puts it up to her head, and he tells her that she's going to go walk her dogs, and she says that he said, if you, while you're out there walking the dog, you scream, you shout, you tell anybody anything, I am going to shoot your dogs, shoot you, and then kill myself, in that order. And
So he predicted what he was going to do in the future with Abby.
5.5 years later, yeah. Now, she didn't tell anybody. Why would she? The cops had already been there. They'd already done nothing. They did not give her the sense, after she called on them to help her, that they could solve her problem. She was the victim of abuse. They came, but they gave him they washed it up. They cleaned it up. They let him go on his way and didn't even spank him. So
And
I put it back on the cops. She what?
She took him back after.
Well, one way or another, which is a consistent pattern.
Which is what they do. And, as you would probably know, Bruce, domestic violence victims go back because of that powerful trauma bond to their abuser. In the face of horrific abuse, the abuser relieves their anxiety with those little breadcrumbs or the flowers, etc. So police officers often expect victims to go back, but it would have also added, I believe, because he was a police officer, to their fuel. He can't be too bad, if she's taken him back, that type of attitude.
Oh, that's one of the biggest problems, is cops who aren't informed, aren't trained in dealing with domestic violence in a trauma-informed way, are very quick to say, holy crap, this is the 5th time we've been to this house that he beats the crap out of her, and she doesn't leave. So the whole
bonding. Yeah.
No, right. The dreaded "why doesn't she just leave" question that makes anybody who knows anything crazy.
Yes.
And that you could fill volumes with answers of why she doesn't leave. What about the kid's school? What about, the job? Where am I going to live? What can I do about my dog? Who's going to care for my mother? Whatever. There's 100,000 reasons. It's an ignorant question. And unless and until cops get that training, unless and until cops are taught that this is a pattern of behavior, it's not a singular incident, hey, we show up on a call because the neighbor heard screaming and yelling, and there either is or isn't a crime, there is or isn't somebody to arrest, you're not going to arrest your way out of this problem. We have to train people how to understand the process of domestic violence and abuse, and family abuse and sexual abuse, and so on and so forth.
Reactive abuse.
And it's there. That training is there. You know this. So why don't we share it? Why don't we insist that the people who are on the leading edge, the cops who we know we need to have, why don't we give them the tools to do the job in a far more sensible way? And by the way, I will also say, it's known, the statistics vary, anything from like 15% to 30% of all of the line of duty deaths of law enforcement officers in the United States, and it's likely so in Australia and New Zealand and England, arise from domestic violence calls. Police calls on domestic violence incidents are known to be unpredictable and very hot and very dangerous. They know this, but rather than understand that, developing a more nuanced and fulsome appreciation for seeing domestic violence in all of its complexities will enable them and arm them with the ability to reduce their own mortality, their own causes of death. It's in their own interest, even if they don't give a crap about the woman who's the 8th time has been beaten by this guy and she just won't leave him. It's in their interest to get a better understanding of the process and the syndrome, the cycle, the pattern, so that they can then deal with it in a far more, I think, effective way and reduce their risk of dying.
Absolutely. So, Bruce, tell us more about the aftermath when you found out that they had been covering up for this man, your beautiful daughter's murderer, and that he had done this to another woman and failed to tell you. after they presented you with the fact that he had taken your daughter's life?
Yeah, initially, again, in the initial aftermath, when they're wrapping their loving arms around you, the sheriff is an interesting cat in and of himself. His name's Chad Chronister. He's married to a billionaire. He had the good fortune to meet a woman who's the heir to a big real estate fortune. And he's just kind of a vainglorious, publicity driven guy. I won't say much more about him except to say he likes to hobnob with celebrities and the powers that be. He's a powerful guy. He's got a big budget. He's politically one of the most powerful people in the Tampa Bay region. But he never did a bad thing. He doesn't know anything they could ever do better. And we sat with him, and he would, he gave me his number. He'd talk. I'm going to check in with you all the time. So on and so forth. And then I started learning, though, about this prior DV episode with Dan Leyden and China Ratner. And I said to him, I want everybody who was on that call in a room with me, with my wife, and with my sons. And he said, no problem. And I will open up investigations. I will fire people. I will arrest people. I will do whatever it takes to get to the bottom if we screwed up. Well, yeah, right. And what he didn't know at the time was I'd already talked to a number of the people who were on that call. I'd already figured out who some of them were, and I'd already had conversations with some of them.
He didn't know. I knew. So you were going to be able to pick out any lies or discrepancies in what he was telling you. Right.
I talked to some, but not all of them, and not all of them were even on with the agency anymore, or still with the agency. But I wanted to ask questions. I smelled a rat, and he said, by all means, we'll do that. Now that he immediately agreed, said, by all means, absolutely. My chief deputy will get it set up. Well, instead of having everybody, it shrunk to just there are like 3 of them, including one who wasn't even there at the time, 2 who weren't there at the time. Only one, the very person who told him not to date her anymore, he was there. Very weak sauce. And what happened was, my boys are very smart. They're all, college educated, just naturally intuitive. One is literally a detective, and they're just smart, capable, brilliant young men who can see through the BS. And we sat and they picked through the BS that we were getting. And I had done my own digging. I'd done public records requests for reports that they said they were doing, but there was nothing to produce. They said there's no report. I said, what do you mean? You said you're doing a report. Where's the report? And they did. There's no report. It was Alice in friggin' Wonderland. I swear, it was nuts. It was crazy, and they can look you right in the eye. And I'm saying, look, here's a written thing of you saying you've opened an investigation, which presumes there'll be a report. And now I'm saying, so show me the report. It's a public document. And they say there's no report. And I go, okay, reconcile that. Make that make sense for me, because I'm not following you.
Well, you're not going to make sense of it, Bruce, because you're talking logic and they're lying.
Right. And they're not going to see if they don't look for it. And they're not looking. So we've, at this point, come to understand that this sheriff's not an imaginative guy. And my wife and I said to him a number of times, like just in the room, face to face, what is going to prevent the same outcome from happening again if it happens tonight? Not tomorrow or next week or next month, but tonight. And they said it wouldn't happen. Very cavalierly, very smugly, no, just can't happen, it won't happen. Now, they'd already had 3 murder-suicides within a span of like 5 years with their agency, some of which are killing their kids, their grandkids, their spouses, themselves. They had a small epidemic of deputies killing themselves and others in this agency. Now, that's a rare number. It's unusual. So there's something going on there. You would think as the head of that kind of an agency, you'd want to know. And there was a time we sat with him, and he did say to my wife and I, we wonder why this keeps happening here. Now, at that point in our
What
relationship,
the murder-suicides or the lack of reports on them?
the former, the murder, he was just commenting, just musing
Yeah.
out loud. Why does this keep happening to us? And I didn't know the answer then. I know the answer now, because the way you run the place, because how you train, how you ignore best practices and more sophisticated understandings of people and dynamics of
I was actually
relationships.
talking about the reports within their agency. If that would be an interesting question. Okay, so you're admitting that this is a thing. We have got a rare number of these cases within our own agency. Do all of them have no reports?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Yeah, I would be interested in seeing that myself. And what I'm particularly interested in, I just came back in May last month from the Conference on Crimes Against Women in Dallas, where I was for the first time in my life surrounded by a lot of people who get it, who understand, who are motivated, who are trained, experienced. What am I? I'm experienced in being the father of a slain daughter. That's what I know. These people know how to be cops, how to be prosecutors, how to be advocates. They're psychologists, they're wizards, and they're wonderful people in all regards. And when you're surrounded with people like that, you very quickly confirm what I'd already learned from all my 3 years of reading, which is to say that the bad behavior of a guy like Dan Leyden, who killed my daughter, was predictable. You said it yourself. These guys who are power hungry, who you give these tools, who then are put in a hot cauldron of interactions with citizens and the public. You could predict that some of them
personality. Yeah, it's never going to be foolproof, but with the right things you should just take for granted with someone you're going to give a gun to, a massive intricate personality test, testing for, sociopathy, psychopathy at the very least. And, and then on top of that, if there's a domestic violence incident they're involved in, that even if it's on its own without, having a disorder picked out, well, you think they wouldn't be taken on if there was a disorder discovered.
Hopefully.
But how are they going to know unless they do those tests?
Yes. And follow up with interim mental health checkup, some kind of wellness check-in. It can't be only on hire and then, 20 years later, you've got a loose cannon, and that happens. These guys get to at the end of their careers and they get very dangerous then, or they're dangerous all throughout. But if it is predictable, and I think we just agreed that it is, then they have a duty to prevent it, and you can prevent it. In the ways we just talked about, among others. Mental health checkups, wellness checkups, and the initial hiring thing. There are a lot of misses. Mark Wynn, who is the dean, the god, the Obi-Wan Kenobi of OIDV training and consulting, 20 some odd year Nashville cop, a real pioneer in the field, who I revere greatly. He makes the point that I lost my train of thought. It was I completely lost where I was going now. I'm so sorry. We were talking about
Mark Wynn, who's just such. You highly respect him.
Yeah, but I know I was thinking about predictable and preventable that they have. Oh, I know what it is. When you're at the hiring phase, that's what I was going. If your application for employment at the Nova Gibson Police Department has one question: have you ever been convicted of a domestic violence offense? Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, no, maybe, explain. Right? But the Bruce Bieber Police Department application for employment has 20 questions. Were you ever accused? Were you ever a witness? Well, you break down the same field, that you expand it to all different angles, different levels, a far more nuanced and complex series of questions, all designed to suss out this person's domestic violence proclivities. It can't just be one question. If you only ask one question, you don't give a rat's ass about whether you're hiring predators or not. If you ask 20 questions, okay, you probably care about it. If during the interview, the Nova Gibson Police Department says, list your last 5 boyfriends, girlfriends, intimate partners. I've heard cops who I know say, while they're sitting there with the applicant in the room, eye to eye, they will hand that list to somebody else who will go call those people and contact them and say, tell me about this person, and see if what they say matches up. Because that's where you're going to, I mean, I don't know the best way to, you talk psychopathy and this and that, and maybe those are the right ways, and they're techniques and tools and indicators.
Yeah,
but I don't know. I don't know
that's just my personal opinion, Bruce. But if I was going, it's not to say that police are likely to be disordered. That's not it at all. It's just that in this position, for your own benefit as well. So you can't be compromised by having malicious and vexatious notifications against you. If I was going for that job, I would want to take that test, because I would be sure that I would pass. I would do the test and go, okay, this is a requirement. You would assume that only the people who are a bit worried, about not passing. Right.
And they do.
Say, no, that's not fair. This is discriminatory, or whatever they say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're agreeing, but you have to do it at the beginning, at the hiring. You got to look out for these bad actors then, and then you have to periodically, and continually monitor them when they're there. And then when it surfaces, like it did in China Ratner's case on July 3rd, 2016, you cannot wash it away. You cannot sweep it under the rug.
That should be just a deal breaker.
It should be.
That's like, to me, that's like, a king's counsel walking into a bank with a gun and saying, put your hands up, hand over all the money, and getting a slap on the wrist, and then prosecuting thieves.
Exactly. It's hypocritical on the highest order.
How does that happen? How does he go back to that job when he's just engaged in the behavior that he supposedly abhors?
Exactly.
And is supposed to be one of the most upstanding citizens in society? It makes no sense.
Well, and furthermore, viewed from the top of that organization down, it erodes confidence and integrity, frankly, in that whole organization. If they abide it, if that king's counsel robs the bank and they don't get arrested and drummed out and pilloried, then you have sullied your reputation. You are dirt. You have no integrity.
Credibility. And it also
credibility.
makes the public think that there's just 2 tiers of justice, doesn't it? It's like
because there are.
Yeah.
Because there are. I mean, and I've done enough reading now to know this. This isn't speculation, and I maintain, I have Google alerts, and I watch and I see, and I know that the dispositions are pled down. In the U.S. they have rules that would make sense to you, that if an officer, a law enforcement officer who is required to carry a weapon as part of his or her job, is convicted of a misdemeanor of domestic abuse, domestic violence, they forfeit the right to own a firearm. They cannot possess or own a firearm. Well, obviously, if a cop can't have a firearm, they can't be a cop. So cops know this. So if their fellow cop is caught in an episode of domestic violence, they're going to do everything they can to twist and squeeze and stretch and manipulate the facts to redefine, reclassify the charge to something other than domestic. The boys' club, yes.
From speaking to numerous clients, Bruce, they certainly make that known to the victim. You go and report. Yeah, you think my mate there is going to take your report seriously? Go ahead. Right. They intimidate the victim, and the victim knows that they'll be protected.
Right, and that's why they don't even bother calling. That's why China didn't call, and that's why my daughter's dead. And furthermore, we all know domestic violence is underreported in the general population. Amongst law enforcement, more so for the reasons you just talked about. If a cop gets called in on the carpet for being an abuser, they could lose their job. So the wife, and I'm making the gender specific here. Yes, we know there are exceptions, but let's say the wife is a civilian and married to a cop. She knows if she says he smacked her in the head with his gun, or even not with his gun, just punched me, domestic violence. If she reports it, he could get the charge. He could lose his gun, loses the gun, he loses his job. He loses his job, she loses her house, the kids are on the street.
That's actually a very common fear from most domestic violence victims, even if it's not a police officer. They because they're so controlled, there's financial abuse, and of course they've got no self-esteem, self-worth. They're so dependent on their abuser, and it stops them from reporting because it might sully their reputation. They might lose their job, and of course the abuser's telling them this. So it's one of the big factors that stops victims from reporting. Yeah. One of many. Yeah.
So that's what happened. Abby, was on a path to success no matter what she did, frankly. She was a scholar. I know I said I'd talk a little bit about her. She was a scholar athlete.
I was just about to say to you, Bruce, we're getting towards the end of the episode, but I want you to tell us all about Abby and your beautiful daughter's life.
Yeah, what did I say? It's funny. She was radiant. She was beautiful. She was talented in all ways. A terrific writer, very skilled. Won academic awards, won athletic awards. A swimmer, a field hockey player, a lacrosse player. Competitive in any and everything she did, but empathetic and compassionate as the day is long. The first one to take in any kind of a stray person or animal, literally, and a big heart, a big brain. I'd like to say that she came back, I remember, after she developed this bizarre interest in Fellini movies, the Italian filmmaker.
I've heard of him.
Very, very dense, weird movies with many layers. But she took a class and just became fascinated with Fellini movies and loved to talk about them. But a broad range of interests, funny, acerbic, sarcastic, just a delight to be around. I miss her terribly. She was super, super tight with my wife, Sarah, best friends, and super tight with her brothers. They had their own language, that doesn't get spoken now because they've shattered this. I mean, I remember after the funeral, again, we were in a home that we hadn't really settled into yet. I've always been a bit of a photo bug, always have a camera, Mm-hmm. And so I have thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of them at all ages. And people would come to the house and, what can I do? People want to be helpful. And we had boxes of pictures, and I would just say, put a piece of tape on this and stick it on the wall. We didn't have anything on the walls. We didn't care. So they're actually, I don't know if you could see any in the background.
I can see a picture of Abby.
Well,
is she in a police uniform?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, let me grab, that's it's the same picture here. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, she's beautiful, Bruce.
She was and is. Yeah, it's funny, that's the picture all cops and servicemen and women have taken at the beginning of their careers, and it's the one that they'll use if you get killed. And they know that. It's a famous picture. Yeah. But she was all things. And right, again, we talked about at the beginning the worry parents have about the knock on the door. Obviously her being our only girl, you fear. It's a physical thing, and there are bad people out there. I know that she's not out there alone, but you worry. And they call it being on the road, doing routine patrol in a patrol car. But after you do that for a certain period of years, you understand and sort of become adept at the job well, then you can be promoted into something that takes you off the routine patrol work that I would argue is, the more dangerous part of it. If you become a detective or some special unit of one kind or another, it's less likely you're going to get that knock at the door. Not that, being any cop anytime, anywhere isn't always dangerous, but it's less so.
Yeah.
And she was right on the cusp of getting off of the road and getting into a special assignment. And, I looked forward to that. And she would have gone on to great things there or somewhere else. Now, I'm very sideways with that whole agency. I should mention, it's worth it, I suppose, that when it happened in this Airbnb rental on the beach in St. Augustine, there were 6 people, Abby and the guy who killed her being 2 of the 6. And of the remaining 4, 3 were deputies, all at the same agency. So there were 3 couples, only 1 civilian, a woman. And when Abby was breaking up with him, we knew it. It was well known. She was in constant texting contact with my wife. And they were going to go home the next day. And she wasn't even staying in the room with him. She was on a couch in a common area, and he was in a room. And he kind of coerced his way onto the trip. She was hoping he wouldn't go on the trip at all, but he, buffaloed his way in anyway. So he somehow induces her to go into his room, and this is the trigger warning again, but he locks the door, and there's some kind of an argument, and they overhear it, and they hear Abby say, "Put down the gun," and he shoots her 3 times in the head, and then he shoots himself. So, she's killed instantly. But the other deputies don't know that, and they retreat to a bedroom on the floor. That all the rooms are on the upper level of the house. And they hide in a closet for nearly 2 hours. They hide, and they call 911, and they never, ever check on her. They never, other than, trying to yell down the hall or something, "Hey, Abby." They never go in there. In the U.S., you might have heard of Uvalde and Parkland, the school, 2 schools where children were victims of mass shooters, and a horrible thing. And cops just stood by and didn't do anything. And they were, criticized and sued, and a big to-do about that, what the cops didn't do when the need arose. Well, these cops didn't either. And now, again, we didn't know them because we hadn't been here long, but in the aftermath of Abby's murder, we came to meet them and know them, and they were distraught, and they thought we would blame them somehow for not having stopped it or something, I don't know. But we didn't know all the facts of what had happened yet, and we didn't see any reason to be mad at them. They didn't do it. So we hugged them and cried with them and said, "No, we don't blame you. We're glad you had a fun time with her until this happened, And then somebody, one of my sons, I think, asked, "Did any of you guys have your guns?" Because cops, I don't know about it in Australia, but even when they're off duty, they sometimes carry their weapons, even though they're not working. And
I am no expert. I was under the impression they had to leave them, in a locker or something
maybe
like that. But I really don't know, Bruce.
Yeah. Well, I know here they frequently can and do, and some even are required to.
Oh,
but
actually, I would say to be a no in Australia, given the gun laws. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just realised the gun laws are different in the US.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Oh, very much so. So here they, they were sitting at my house right here, outside here, and they asked them, "Hey, any of you guys have your guns?" And they said, "No, we had packed up 2 of the guys had brought their guns, but they were packed up downstairs, inaccessible when the shooting started." So that was their reasoning for not having intervened. Now, some people say, "I don't give a crap, do you have a gun or not? You're still kicking the door in, and maybe she's injured and could be saved. I don't know."
Yeah.
And I went, and again, they're public records, and I got the public record from the jurisdiction in St. Augustine. And I talked to those people, and I got the 911 audio and the transcript, and I almost fell out of my chair when I heard the dispatcher ask them while they're hiding in the closet, "Do you guys are cops, you're from somewhere else, I understand. how many of you, where are you? What's happening? Do any of you have firearms on you? And I was shocked when I heard the answer, yes. So they looked my wife, me, and my sons in the eye and lied to us about having a gun on them a number of times. And that's a very disturbing fact. The lying as much as having it not doing anything, frankly. I mean, most cops who I talk to assume they were fired, and they were promoted, actually.
That's very
and they said,
this was all after, wasn't it? It was when it had come out that you knew that this was a predator. Yeah, so
a lot of things came out after.
They've been filled in on what to say.
I don't know. They again, where we started with the sheriff, he only wants to own the good news. He doesn't want to own the bad news.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to him.
Suspicious, isn't it? And it certainly doesn't have people like you have a lot of faith or trust in the system.
No.
Why would you?
No, and why would China, right?
Yeah.
That's why she didn't call. And an agency needs to say, no, we didn't do anything wrong and we don't need to do anything better. They need to say, why is it that we, the law enforcement agency, aren't the sort of people that people in need, victims, feel comfortable calling? What is it about us that makes them not want to call us? We have to flip that. Those cops need to be the one that people are quick to call.
Yeah.
That believe they're going to help them, not hurt them.
You've got one
It's their job.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like wanting to be a cook and not knowing how to cook a steak or, boil an egg. That's your job. You got one job.
Right. You don't say, I don't want to learn how to cook an egg. I don't need to know how to cook a steak. No, you do. Well, you do have to know.
That's what cooks do. Oh, my goodness. Just horrific, Bruce. Look, is there... just to finish with, is there any advice that you can put out there to other people, victims, parents, police in Australia and all over the world, so that this doesn't happen again? It just happens too often. I don't know if you've heard of Hannah and Small Steps for Hannah. That was a beautiful mum and her 3 children a number of years ago in the same circumstances, murder-suicide. He confronted her in her, I'm probably not going to get the exact details of the case, but just tragic. And he lit them all on fire and then killed himself, his 3 children, and Hannah. Hannah's amazing parents started up Small Steps for Hannah. That was just in Brisbane a few years ago, where I live. And Hannah did all the right things. She reported, she did all the right things, but there was just no consequences. There was more respect for the abuser than protecting future victims. So we don't want any more people like your beautiful Abby or Hannah. And just quickly, Hannah's parents are actually single-handedly responsible for the coercive control legislation.
The new laws,
that was
we're right behind. Well, we're not right behind you. We need to be behind you.
Yeah,
and that has to happen.
Yeah, Sue and Lloyd, Hannah's parents were just so diligent in getting that legislation passed.
Great.
And it's now in. Queensland just had its first person charged. I think it was just this week it came in.
I think I saw that actually on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
To your question, a woman in particular, a woman in crisis, needs not to take advice from me, first of all, but there are people out there who are there to help. Here, they have family justice centers and other hotlines. There's a national hotline. And as you said correctly, it's the most dangerous time. So nobody can tell a woman when she's ready to leave, how she should leave, but there are people that can talk her through it and help her develop a plan that makes a safe exit.
Exactly. And it's just, I think it's just got to be reinforced over and over again that the lack of physical abuse is not an indication of their,
absolutely.
if they're going to be, have their lives taken when they leave.
No, you're right. And then with respect to, calls to action and the like, I know I'm in the state of Florida, and I didn't know till after Abby was killed and I started this journey of learning that Florida at a certain time, over a decade ago, led the nation in pioneering development of officer-involved domestic violence model policies so that a law enforcement agency could have a standalone policy that centers the whole issue. That, I think we agreed, some cops, not all, not even most, but some cops are going to want to get in this job for bad reasons. And then combined with the training and the access to power and information systems, it makes them super predators. That's very dangerous. Law enforcement needs to know that. Model policies help them control that behavior and provide for protocols for when it happens. All cops know that they're going to run DV calls, domestic violence calls, and that they're dangerous. And they're trained on that. But they're not trained on showing up and finding out that, hey, wait a minute, the person doing the beating, the abuser, is a cop. Maybe from your own agency, maybe from the next town over.
Yeah.
And different rules apply then, and they need to know that. They need to be protocols, and they need to be followed. That's what model rules for OIDV, model policies, rather.
Consequences.
The whole thing. It's a whole system. It's all of it. And secondly, the training. There is trauma-informed domestic violence training for officers on how to handle these calls, both with civilians and with officers who are perpetrators. They should be mandatory. There should be mandatory training. There should be mandatory standalone policies, not just a little provision in the standard operating procedure manual. So when these things start happening on a national basis, I'll understand and believe that we can start bringing these numbers down. A woman was just killed in Kentucky. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago by a cop.
Yeah.
Haley Davidson, the latest. I always say we started this with why am I here? To stop somebody else from getting that knock at the door. It just happened again.
And I wonder if that cop had if there was a history of abuse.
There is.
Covered up. Just like Abby's murderer. Yeah.
I would wager to say that in more times than not, if you look for it, you will find it. If you don't look for it, no shock, you will not. Chad Chronister doesn't look for it. Yeah. That's why when he throws his hands up, why does this keep happening? Because you don't look, because you don't pay attention, because you don't care. That's why. If you cared enough, you'd look. And he should call me and we could work it out and get him a state-of-the-art policy and a training regimen and start saving lives.
Yeah.
That would be the smartest thing.
We wish, we don't wish there were more people like you, Bruce, in terms of you ever having had to experience this and the loss of for you and your wife. I mean, your wife lost her only daughter. Just beyond imagination. So we wish there was less people like you in terms of there being less victims, but I am so glad that there are people like you that are using such a horrific tragedy in their lives to try and make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else, that no other parent gets that knock on the door.
Precisely. Thank you. That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
That simple.
Okay.
And thank you for letting me talk about it.
Oh, my pleasure. And once again, I'm so grateful for you speaking up for victims and to try and get the legislation, etc., changed to protect victims. Yeah.
And I'm not doing it alone. I have help. So there are cops who get it, who I'm working with too. So I know we got to run, but Brandon Wooten. Brandon is in Fort.
I know Brandon. I did an episode with him, and he is amazing. More people that understand this trauma, like you and Brandon, talking around the world. That's what we need more of.
Amen.
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right,
Okay.
Nova.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the end of another Fake Love and Flying Monkeys episode. What a tragic but preventable case. I am just so glad that people like Bruce, his wife, and their sons are fighting so hard to make sure that no other family has to get that knock on the door. And of course, people like Sue and Lloyd Clark, Hannah's parents in Australia, who have worked so hard to get the coercive control legislation in place. Sue and Lloyd lost not only their daughter, but their 3 beautiful grandchildren whose lives were taken by their own father in his final act of revenge and punishment against Hannah before taking his own life. And also the parents of Gabby Petito, who are working so hard as well to make sure that no other family has to go through this when their daughter lost her life in a final act of rage from her abuser when he realised that he was losing control over her. And what makes these cases even more tragic is that the families don't get justice in terms of seeing this person, the person who murdered their loved one, in a court, facing a jury of their peers who might actually judge them as the coward that they were, the coward that chose to take the easy way out rather than face the consequences of their actions. I put a trigger warning at the start of this episode, guys, but if you are feeling triggered now, then please reach out and get support. If you would like to have a one-on-one Zoom counselling session with myself, please just see my website link in the description. On that note, guys, it's bye from me for now. Until tomorrow's episode, remember, you are worthy of so much love, and you certainly are worthy of a whole lot more than a lifetime of fake love and flying monkeys.